Satellite coming down in 3, 2, 1.
Go, go, go!
This is a video in 5 parts. Part 1 is a personal story that describes how I became a lifelong Battlefield player. It is deeply connected to the topic of this video, and I feel that it weaves the entire theme together. However, it is not directly a discussion of Battlefield game details, and as such, if you wish to get to the heart of the subject matter, feel free to skip ahead to Part 2, which can be found at the 9-minute 40-second mark, or by clicking the timestamp in the video description or pinned comment. Please enjoy. This is a server browser. Specifically, it is the in-game server browser of Battlefield 1942, which was released in September 2002. I, a teenager of 14, knew almost nothing of PC gaming, and it would be a close friend that would be the one who introduced me to Battlefield in spring of 2003, just as I was entering high school. Now, naturally, we tried to play together as much as we could. Him teaching me the basics of PC gaming and hardware, and peripherals, and settings, and me just enjoying the new game and the grand new world I was entering. But we couldn't always play together. We were kids, and things got in the way, so I often found myself playing alone since I didn't have any other friends who played Battlefield 1942, let alone were PC gamers. It wasn't like a guiding hand was necessary to play anyway. Alone, I entered the world of Battlefield through the server browser. Knowing only a handful of the game's maps, I would join different servers, mostly based on their names. And over a short time I came to understand the specifics of each server. Their map rotations, their themes, their admins, their modifications, and more gradually, started to remember the same recurring people that I was playing with. There was one particular server that I came to love. It was a 24/7 Wake Island server named after its community, Team FHA. I loved the map, and the more I played on that particular server, I began to notice that a lot of other people routinely played there too. It begins like any social interaction. You, a shy loner in a new environment, amongst people who largely already know each other, and who dominate the chat box with their jokes and teases and insults and bragging. Eventually, you gain the courage to start chatting as well. After all, since these people are going to be around, you might as well get to know them. Soon, they recognize you too, saying hi when you join the server, and making fun excuses when you kill them. This was my experience on Team FHA Wake, and over the course of a few weeks I was having so much fun with people I was routinely playing with and chatting with, purely in-game by the way, that I finally was interested enough to follow that URL that was always popping up on the loading screen and in the game UI. Leading to the community's website, I registered on the forums and even found instructions for TeamSpeak. Yeah, it's been around that long. In no time, I was posting on the forums about all things Battlefield or otherwise with people that I had recently been gaming with and some others I hadn't. And every time I loaded up the game, I joined the TeamSpeak server and played with people that I had never known just a few weeks prior. The people I met were often gracious, welcoming, and inviting, even to a young kid with a high-pitched voice. Like me, they just wanted people to game with. I was quiet at first, like I was when I first joined the game server, but over time I added my 2 cents here and there, made a joke or two, and soon was a regular like the rest of them. We'd talk about the game, the maps, the community, and in between rounds, talk about life and things outside of Battlefield. I had found friends. I had found a community. Team FHA also had a competitive wing at the time, which competed in TWL. That's the Team Warfare League, a long-gone website with leagues and ladders for numerous online games, and Battlefield was one of them. In mere months of owning the game, I was curious to see what it was about. Competitive gaming sounded cool. Admittedly, the team wasn't great. Practices were run almost like it was a softball league, and I never knew if I could make an 8v8 match due to my parents making plans for me and not understand what I was doing. But man, was it fun, and it fueled a desire in me to get so much better at the game, and perhaps work my way toward being the best on the team, and perhaps further to join one of those teams at the top. I was hooked. Not that I didn't play on other servers, but that Wake Island community became my home. My real-life friend who got me into Battlefield had taken to some other new game, and I was on my own. But not really. I had the community. That's where my new friends were. My dedication to the community and the respect I had gained led to something crazy. The head admin allowed me to lead the competitive team for Battlefield Vietnam once it came out, simply because I really wanted to. I was entrusted with admin tools, a Vietnam server, my own TeamSpeak server, and the freedom to recruit and form the team as I wanted. And I did, at 15 years old, which still blows my mind. Fast forward another year or so, and with Battlefield 2, I had begun to move on. To other teams, to other communities, to new friends and new opportunities in Battlefield. But I never broke those ties to Team FHA. In the many years that followed, the team that I played competitive Battlefield 2 with practically became family. They were people that I, as an introvert, had come to know better than people at school I saw every day, and even some real-life friends I saw just as frequently. Even now, 20 years on, I never stopped being friends with those people. Some I still have as Facebook friends, a few others on Steam or some other social network. And we still chat from time to time, sharing life updates and reminiscing about the old days. But even for those that I hadn't spoken to in decades, I remember the gamer tags, I remember their voices, the jokes, the playstyles, the memories, the Battlefield. Battlefield is what brought us together. It was our common interest. The community is what made it last. I could always find people who wanted to play together for hours and for years. I share this story now because there is a serious problem in the Battlefield world. The past few titles have stripped away the semblance of community, starting with Battlefield 1. Battlefield 5 effectively killed the community server, and now with 2042 the server browser has ended entirely, demonstrating a shifting gaming culture toward the insistence on short-term matchmaking, on being thrown into the game at any means, with players you will likely never see again. The essence of the individual communities is one of the great unspoken pillars of the Battlefield series. It is what truly set it apart from its competitors, giving fans the means to make friends and enjoy the game for years. Without community building, Battlefield has turned into solitary play, generating burnout, exhaustion, apathy, and boredom. We have forgotten what it means to be a part of a community, and the incredible long-term benefits it has on the series. We have forgotten that it all stems from this tool right here. I would not be who I am, both as a gamer or as a person, if I did not have that experience, and I know I am not the only one. All of it happened because of a server browser. I chose one server I liked. I played on it often. I met like-minded people who did the same thing. I found that server's website through its links, and I never stopped having fun with the game. I started playing alone. I ended up with friends for life. That is the effect of the community. That is the critical importance of the Battlefield server browser. In the modern gaming era, a counter-argument can be made that social networks, streaming tools, and Discord servers have replaced the community building of old. This is true to a limited extent. Community websites are few and far between, and forums are largely a thing of the past. Gaming with friends nowadays often revolves around joining a Discord server or befriending some streamer on Twitch or YouTube. But ultimately, this encompasses a tiny sliver of the overall Battlefield player base. This is because before, with the server browser, finding a community was natural, easy, intrinsic to the experience. Anyone could look at a server name, their banner, the map rotation, whatever, and play on it for a bit. This allowed people who, for example, only really loved infantry maps, a place dedicated to their main interest. Once a regular in that server, there was a natural process by which players filtered into the respective communities running those servers, fomenting long-term player retention. This is the process that was critical to the long-term survival of Battlefield games. Demonstrable proof of this exists in the form of the few large communities still carrying on the legacy of past Battlefield games, like Battlefield 1, 4, 3, Bad Company 2, Battlefield Vietnam, even 1942. The communities have kept them alive, sharing necessary files, technical information, and lastly, providing a place to play together, enabled by in-game banners, links, and server messages. While I really want to hit Battlefield 5 hard for not launching with community servers or RSP like Battlefield 1 had soon after its own launch, it turns out that
life finds a way.
I never expected the community games feature of Battlefield 5 to amount to much, since it was provided in the waning days of the game's supported life, without multiple critical admin features even provided with Battlefield 1. Yet, factors like a demand in custom map rotations and more emphatically, a safe harbor from the game's many cheaters, has allowed a few select communities to thrive as well. Battlefield 5 is still an odd situation, since limited admin capabilities filter cheaters by banning high player stats, effectively banning good players. Nevertheless, the community point is proven, even in a game where for so long the only option was EA official servers. On that note, let's talk about the effect of persistent servers and map rotation. Even though Battlefield 5 effectively killed several communities because of an inability to advertise or set custom rules, the default official servers still, in a way, allowed people to make friends. This was because once you joined a server like in games past, you could be in it for the long haul. Heck, you could be in a single server all night without touching the menus. In this way, the same friendly banter and growing familiarity between long-running players could still happen, albeit on a shorter scale and time frame. As I've stated already, matchmaking, at least in the way it's implemented in 2042, kills this completely. Players are scattered to the winds after a match. Most return to the menus to re-queue in search of that ideal map or team. Meanwhile, the post-game screen has a terribly utilized chat box limiting social interaction. All chat, the ability to type to the enemy team, is disabled by default. Console players mixed into lobbies as part of crossplay matchmaking have a tiny, almost non-existent window to even type here, both because of previous patches limiting it, and because of the difficulty to do so with a controller in the first place. Even if there is someone in-game that you wanted to add as a friend and squad up with after, this is difficult. Sure, the recent player pools exist, but I've rarely found a particular player that I'm looking for from the most recent match. On top of the severe damage it does to communities, matchmaking is also incredibly detrimental to the experience of the player, regardless of whether they have a preset squad or are playing alone. Matchmaking is a total crapshoot. You never know what you will load into. Will you join a game just starting, one midway through, or one near the end? Will you backfill a team whose players are leaving because of a base camp? Nearly all players want the greatest chance of success in a game. They also want a fair playing field, good competition, and a desire to affect the outcome of a round. These expectations are best met when players begin a round from its very onset, from the pre-game countdown to the initial rush for objectives. There is a sense of commitment to the round, a stake in it. When a player joins a round in progress, this isn't there. For me personally, nothing makes me care less about the outcome of a round, nor my performance or impact, than joining a game midway through. 2042's matchmaking enables this situation time after time after time. When a round ends, a return to the menu begins the whole process over. If playing alone, there is an even greater chance that you will be backfilled into a lobby that has already begun. And if you load in midway through seeing a clear outcome, there is a high chance that you will just back out and try again. Even when the round ends, there is no guarantees that it keeps the lobby together. The matchmaking design of 2042 is currently inconsistent. While smaller playlists, such as the current Conquest Close Quarters, which is persistent and will carry on to the next map like one would classically expect, the all-out warfare queues have conflicting possibilities. In these end-of-round screens, a countdown shows the time before another matchmaking search. These results are usually immediate. However, the new round does not give you a 5-second countdown like usual, meaning you can't decline it, nor does it show you the next map, which can absolutely be the same one you just played. In letting this countdown proceed, it is extremely rare, even now, for lobbies to be kept together, at least whatever portion of players don't return to the menu on instinct. In my experience, there might be instances where most of a lobby is kept together, but this is difficult to confirm since I've had games end, the timer count down, and the queue find a new match immediately, only to be placed in a new lobby where the game has already begun. This is something which should not occur if the server was proceeding to the next map and a fresh round was set to begin. With persistent servers in every game prior, this has never been a major issue, simply because no matter what the situation is in the round you load into, the next round is guaranteed to be new. You have a clean slate. Most people would load into a game, warm up a bit, and then when the next map hits, take it seriously and give it their all. And then there's the maps. Most importantly, in a server browser, you know what map you get next. You know if it's the one you want to play or the one you want to sit out on. Even if it's one you don't like, maybe you can tolerate it because that good one might come up next in the rotation or the map vote. The fact remains that there is predictability. You are not queued into a random pile of maps with a chance of hitting the one you hate over and over and over. In 2042, you can go entire days of gaming, hitting that matchmaking button countless times and still never see your favorite maps at all. You could be forced to play a few that you hate on repeat, and that's just the way it is. Of course, once you find a match, you can see what map it is and back out if you so choose before the loading commences. With a server browser, you can largely find the map you want to play right then and there, or at least know for a fact when it's coming up in the rotation. In the past, you might have even been able to find 24/7 servers of your favorite map, and it would just be easy to find. The key here is predictability and variety. It doesn't matter if your game has 10 maps or 30 if you never get to experience them all on a regular basis. I don't want to play Manifest 4 times in a row, so naturally I get frustrated with the game. Variety keeps the player experience fresh, and honestly, I wouldn't mind having to play a map I hate every once in a while just for the sake of that change. Another point on persistent servers and the server browser is intrinsic to the very nature of Battlefield itself, playing together with friends on a team-based game. We have already talked at length about how essential a server browser is for enabling new social relationships to form and communities to grow, but in reality, just the fundamental day-to-day enjoyment of playing with friends is hampered by matchmaking. Matchmaking, in principle, limits you to queue for a game with a pre-made party of 4 players. This is determined by 2042's maximum squad size. What happens if you had an extra friend? Certainly no one person could have more than 3 friends to game with. Well, 2042 eventually allowed for those extra players to be able to join that full party in a lobby once they found one. That is, of course, if there was room on the team. In a lobby of 128 players, sure, this wasn't a problem too often, but with 64 player queues, the lobby frequently fills up before the friend can get in, placing them in a queue of their own. Now, the party is playing the game while however many extra friends are stuck in queue waiting for an open slot. This is already boring and definitely frustrating for the players left out, but once they do get in, a good chunk of the round is already over. The repugnant icing on the cake is that once the round is over, all parties generally return to the main menu, and the process must repeat again and again, never permitting a fulfilling experience for those left outside the party. The server browser conversely not only allows for those extra players to join and stay in that lobby with their friends for as long as they want, they also have no problem locating the server that they are in just by communicating the server name. If Battlefield intends to market itself as a game to play with friends, this new dynamic is antithetical to that ideal. Players left out will simply want to go play another game while the party remains full. There are other substantive needs for the server browser beyond that of community growth, competitive play, map rotations, or player retention. Chief among these is the limitations of the game's anti-cheat tools. In the world of PC gaming, the battle between cheater and anti-cheat is eternal, and Battlefield has a mired history on this subject. While some titles had a more robust defense than others, greater efforts have been made in recent years, even going so far as to retroactively add EA anti-cheat software to Battlefield 5 some 6 years after launch. But the battle continues and the problem remains. The effect of the server browser, and particularly the community-run server, was and still is a secondary line of defense against the cheater menace. Within the more notable, effective communities, admins were often easily accessible. Volunteers who spectated a player, checked their stats, verified their cheat history on web databases, and inevitably banned those individuals made for a cleaner, more balanced gaming environment. It is 100% true that not all community servers are equal in this reliability. It is also true that not all are equal in their tolerance toward good players, nor are they immune to abuses of power themselves. But I would argue as a veteran of the series that the worst community servers are easily recognizable and thankfully avoidable. The freedom of choice and a variety of options, at least back in their primes, allowed gamers to find the server most appropriate for them. I will also add that in Battlefield games where both EA DICE official servers ran for years alongside community-run options, it was the official EA servers that were often chaotic landscapes filled with cheaters and never an admin present to do anything. In this regard, even with potential lapses in decent judgment, I would advocate for the safety of a community-run server 9 times out of 10. Finally, there is the issue of the global player base and the effect of region-locked matchmaking. Irrelevant of any game's popularity, eventually the sustained player count of a region dwindles to the point where local games are almost impossible to find. This isn't some wild speculation, it's inevitable. In long past Battlefield games, the harsh reality is that to find playable lobbies, joining servers on another continent is a frequent, even daily occurrence. But there it is, the game is still playable in such a manner, and impossible otherwise. A server browser allows dedicated core fans a long-term continuous option to play, even if the connecting ping is far higher. Depending on time zones, active player counts, or peak hours, any gamer in regions with low activity can join a server and play normally. Mostly. It is still, after all, far better than not playing at all, or playing almost exclusively against bots, which is what can, and does, happen to several Battlefield players scattered around the world via 2042's matchmaking. The most comical aspect of Battlefield's hard shift away from the server browser is the fact that a matchmaking button has existed in almost every Battlefield game since 2005. It's true, it's been there since Battlefield 2. Most people don't remember it because in almost every iteration it barely functioned. It didn't matter the game, you clicked the button and it tried its best to filter you into a round on the server browser, almost always an empty server or one nearly there, on a game mode you didn't want to play, or on a server on the other side of the globe with 300 ping. Even for new players, all it usually took was 1 or 2 attempts to completely ignore it forever. The only exceptions to this might be in the console-exclusive titles of Battlefield 1943 and Bad Company 1, and the heavily console-oriented Bad Company 2. Even though the latter would receive a server browser on its PC release, the console version relied on a quick play button with a good array of options and filters for maps and different game modes. As Battlefield games became more complex and multiple new game modes were added, new quick play buttons were added to find those specific trending game modes, even showing the amount of servers playing them. In each game, these trending modes were not in fact trending. They were often empty, and listing the games available would prove it. Even if you tried to select Conquest, full well knowing that there are servers available, it would still fail. If you think that this system was improved by Battlefield 1, think again. The results were much the same. Now, perhaps these quick play buttons worked more effectively during each game's prime, at least with finding a playable game since more players were available, I give it that. But it still consistently filtered players to bad lobbies and wrong regions. As such, the server browser remained the primary way to experience Battlefield. Battlefield 1 was where the problems truly began. Here we see the server browser ominously referred to as the old school method, despite it being the best option by far, arguably the only realistic option. The new all-in-one Battlefield menu, which was introduced with Battlefield 1, streamlined the launch process for all past and future content, integrating Battlefield 4 and later Battlefield 5. At this time, Battlefield 4's menu was retroactively altered to display the same old-school server browser language which wasn't there previously. This integrated experience continues to have lingering problems, ranging from purchased games not appearing as such in the menu, the inability to launch Battlefield 3 or Hardline since they exclusively utilized Battlelog, and most annoyingly, they still didn't launch the different titles without having to close the menu and open the other games separately, defeating its entire purpose. This was doubly so when trying to open games from Steam. Another major change came in the form of RSP. Battlefield 1's rental server program came soon after launch, shifting the previous server hosting responsibilities from third-party companies to EA dedicated servers. Practically, this did have advantages, such as a uniform hardware quality and direct support. However, it drastically cut down on the available admin options and plugin tools. This can definitely be seen as a misstep, but the rental server program did end up sustaining the long-term player base of the game, and again demonstrated the strength of communities in keeping the game alive. Ultimately, the biggest mistake was not improving on this exact system heading into the next game. For the purposes of my current topic, Battlefield 5 demonstrates the true nosedive of community support and server browser implementation. The game featured no rental server program, instead keeping players locked to DICE-only servers for essentially the entirety of its supported life. Only at the very end, nearly 2 years after launch, the community games tools would arrive, offering players and communities a pale shadow of the admin features and options provided in Battlefield 1. We could argue it's a miracle even that was provided. Not having the tools for almost 2 years effectively killed many communities which survived on in-game server hosting and branding. This doesn't even take into account other major limitations of community games, like only being able to have about half of the game's maps in the rotation maximum. Again, variety matters. But that's just the community side. What about the server browser itself? Battlefield 5, perhaps fulfilling that ominous rebranding of the browser in Battlefield 1, actively took steps to bury it within the game menu UI, indicating a major shift toward hitting the quick play button for matchmaking. The methods to find it were confusing and actively misleading. The first is by going 2 menus into the multiplayer games options. Similar in appearance to its launch form, large tiles were shoved in your face featuring major playlists for tactical and strategic conquest, a smaller box for trending modes, and a list of buttons for lesser specific game modes. Here, and notably rebranded, the server browser is presented only as Advanced Search. While Advanced Search may be descriptive enough for the more knowledgeable or curious gamer to find the browser, the UI design actively works to focus players' attention to the quick play options. A further menu deep, you could have a playlist selected, but down below on the near edge of the screen, a List Games button is now hiding the server browser, again by a different label and in a different location. Located on each playlist tile, this button launches the server browser filtered only for that game mode, which might be confusing for players who are perhaps looking to play other modes or certain maps, especially if they are trying to access it via the tactical or strategic playlists. Alternatively, the Community Games button, added along with the feature, takes players first and foremost to the option to set up a server rather than viewing the existing list. To do that takes one more click on the Browse Games button now at the top of this menu. However, clicking this has the filters automatically set to what your most recent game type was, effectively discounting and ignoring a vast array of community servers running across all game modes. Notably, the Advanced Search option on the right of each quick play tile also takes you to the server browser, again pre-filtered to your last option. Assuming you are a frequent user of the server browser anyway, these filters frequently reset regions, maps, modes, and player count, and often toggles between community and official games, making interactions lengthy and frustrating. In this game, improvements were clearly made in the matchmaking logic of the quick play buttons, at least with finding games, which is a good thing. Providing that easy and effective method of getting players in-game is beneficial. Not that it was perfect. It still throws players into weird regions, flips the game's playlist tiles around randomly, and the trending mode tile is often anything but. If Battlefield 5's matchmaking buttons had one singular redeeming quality, it was that it filtered players into existing DICE servers found alternatively on the server browser, and that those servers were persistent. Once you were in, you were in. The round ends and moves to the next predictable map. As stated earlier, this is the right thing to do, and yet was also ultimately abandoned in 2042. But above all of this, effectively hiding the server browser from players after it being the primary Battlefield multiplayer system for decades was uncalled for. This has greater implications than most realize. Perhaps there is a claim that matchmaking is the preferred, modern solution to multiplayer gaming lobbies. I don't deny that some people like hitting that single easy button after all. But this isn't a one-stop method for all FPS titles or franchises. What works for a 20-player max TDM lobby is significantly different from a 64-player Battlefield server and needs to be treated as such. If Battlefield 5's menu system and player preferences were used as evidence to push matchmaking and prove its viability and popularity over a server browser, this likely aided in the argument to phase out the feature in future titles, namely in 2042. This decision would have been based on critically impaired data. Accuracy cannot be provided when the classically preferred alternative is fundamentally hidden, relabeled, and intentionally hamstrung. As we arrive at 2042, we have a basic understanding of what once was and what is now lost. So let me pose a new question. with the server browser in combination with long-lasting and dedicated communities essentially acting as the final player-based bastions in bygone Battlefield titles, what will actually happen to a Battlefield game without a true server browser in the long run? Regardless of the quality or reputation of 2042, what occurs in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? Is there a player base? How would you know there is a player base? Would your matchmaking queues simply last for several minutes, as already happens sometimes? Would they place you in a lobby waiting for more human players to arrive, as already happens sometimes? Would there be just enough players to start a game, but the lobby is 90% AI? Would there be game modes that would need to be removed from the menus permanently? Logically, it will likely be all of the above, just spread over time. But as the core player base of 2042 shrinks to the point where game lobbies are not being replenished and where AI are numerous, I firmly believe that the total player count will begin to crash further. As occasionally interesting as it is to have a few AI bots fill in the gaps of missing players, such as they are, fighting whole teams of them and frequently will be the game's death knell, denying any source of competition, fairness, skill, social interaction, dynamic gameplay, and feeling of, well, being in a multiplayer game. A second possibility does exist for 2042. In the long term, Portal might very well be the game's salvation, humorously enough. Being partitioned from the main all-out warfare modes and menus, it was not fed into by the quick play buttons like in previous titles, contributing to its low usage. Practically ignored by the vast majority during its supported life, its server browser with temporary but persistent custom creation, along with set map rotations and limited admin controls, might be the only effective way players find matches, what with quick play buttons starting to fail. It also has the added bonus of not being region locked. For all we know, a server browser in 2042 may get the last sarcastic laugh. The forced implementation of matchmaking in 2042 has created another issue, this time retroactively. There are many players who are new to the series with 2042, and who already know about, or inevitably discover, the previous titles in the franchise. Often after some inquiry, they go back and purchase Battlefield 4, or 1, or 5 at the recommendation of fans critical of 2042. It is not an exaggeration when I say that I have now seen dozens of posts on social media, on forums, or in chat boxes of streamers of these players confused and convinced that all previous titles are dead despite being far from it. The inevitable reveal? They are opening these titles and hitting the quick play or matchmaking buttons, finding empty servers or errors, and giving up. Instructions to use the server browser is the very easy solution, but for every person who does go through the effort to ask, many more likely just perceive an active Battlefield title as dead. Part of the appeal of the Battlefield franchise is that a person can go back in time and experience the previous titles and eras, even as far back as 1942. It is the server browser which makes it possible. Had many of those previous titles been built like 2042, we would likely have been in a state where going back to play Battlefield 3 would result in me sitting in a queue for 20 minutes, region locked and never finding a lobby. Even if I did and it was barely half full, I would likely back out and give up. Matchmaking would inevitably turn out like the current state of Battlefield 5's Firestorm, unable to find matches or know exactly how many people are even playing it. Going forward, as Battlefield presses toward its next iteration, there are three distinct possibilities for multiplayer. The first of these is that what happened in 2042 happens again, in almost the exact same way. No server browser is present, and the focus is placed explicitly on a matchmaking system on the menus, albeit with some minor overhaul. This is a very distinct possibility given the trend away from the server browser since Battlefield 1 and a push toward a get in the game as fast as possible button. For what it's worth, it's also the worst possible option. Not only would there be yet another Battlefield game which shuts the door on its communities, on map rotations, and on long-term success, but it also invites significant backlash from the community and longtime Battlefield fans once again. Regardless of what improvements are made to such a system, a matchmaking button just does not feel like Battlefield and does not represent what made the franchise a success, nor helped distinguish it from its competitors. Option 2 was a major 180-degree turn on the issue, implementing a full server browser back on the menu as the primary launch option, with a few minor quick play tiles scattered around for easy access and fulfilling that requirement. In essence, almost the inverse to how Battlefield 5 menus worked. This is by far the least likely option, given the trajectory as we've seen, but perhaps all of the negative and loud feedback on this issue may have actually won out. Multiple major U-turns were made over the course of 2042's supported life, including the addition of the scoreboard, addition of the class system and all chat, VoIP, major vehicle changes, UI fixes, and updated pre-game and end-of-round screens. Maybe the server browser was one of those, oh crap, we need that features, and it just couldn't happen post-launch. The third and final option is a combination of both quick play button and server browser displayed as equals on the main menu. This is, I believe, by far the best of both worlds and the way to move forward. The menu UI will give players that choice of the old-school, manual Battlefield server browser and a fast, easy-to-use matchmaking button. They would complement each other. Within the server browser, DICE official servers would be listed along community-created game servers. A server setting amounting to a DICE official option would keep settings the same as the EA servers, which would allow them to be listed here with no wild setting changes, but allow for community branding, admin tools, and a custom map rotation. The quick play buttons on the menu would maintain drop-downs to toggle certain modes, filtering players into the best available active server in the server browser. This matchmaking would search DICE official servers by default, but include a toggle box on the menu to include community official servers as well. This provides an option for greater server availability, and yet acts as a safeguard for players looking to avoid any servers with community admin problems. The updated matchmaking would prioritize servers with the highest player count within the local region, ensuring the best quality lobby and sustaining the existing server populations without spreading players into multiple half-filled games. If queue times start to rise because several servers hit capacity, players will be filtered into the next best options available. For smaller, less popular game modes, matchmaking would act the same way. The only difference being that if no DICE or community official server was active at the time, a new instance would be spooled up, joined, and added to the server browser until it's no longer populated. AI bots would fill the lobby until additional players join, allowing the mode to at least be experienced. 2 simultaneous entry points in the form of the browser menu and quick play buttons would continuously filter players into these temporary servers until filled, sustaining them for longer periods. This system combines elements from multiple Battlefield games, but refines it into an easier to understand and effective system, providing both options on equal footing. I am not sure on the likelihood of this being a probable expectation, but I once again feel it marks the best path forward. It satisfies the requirements of the community who want a server browser. RSP, or server creation, reinstitutes a means by which communities can grow again. A means to provide easy access to desired maps and map rotations, and finally still allows for a fast, single-click-and-go matchmaking button for those who prefer it. This, to me, feels like a modern solution that keeps everyone happy and still maintains that unique Battlefield feeling. We can only hope that it's in the cards, because the current trajectory is untenable. I am not the only Battlefield player that became a dedicated fan of the franchise through a community found through the server browser. In fact, long-term Battlefield players are still being created through the older titles, leaning on those existing communities which provide social platforms, friendly environments, and easy access to squad mates. Whether these players or their communities have viability in the future is anyone's guess, given that community features continue to be stripped away in recent games. I didn't even touch on these, like platoon pages or simple things like the lack of a clan tag or prefix. After all, how do you know communities exist if you can't see them? How do you ask to join a group you cannot find? The server browser is almost elemental to Battlefield. It is a means of community growth, to make new friends and facilitate long-term enjoyment and player retention. It is a method through which gamers around the globe can continue to play when their own region dwindles. It allows players to choose the fun they want to have, on the maps they want to play there and then, and with as many friends as they want at a time. The server browser keeps the enduring legacy of past Battlefield titles alive, and with community involvement provides a last line of defense against those who would ruin the experience for everyone. I do not know what the future holds for the Battlefield franchise, but based on my personal experience and that of those who I've known for decades, it is the server browser, tied with community server hosting, that is essential to the long-term growth and survival of the Battlefield series. It is the critical element to great player satisfaction, team-based multiplayer gaming, and ultimately is the overlooked integral pillar responsible for as much of the series' success as its unparalleled sandbox legacy.